Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Dime Journal Club of 2022. I am absolutely delighted to welcome colleagues from the Critical Path for Parkinson's and expert members representing many of the organizations that they convene in pursuit of their mission to lead our first conversation of the year. Before we go ahead, dive into the discussion and you get to meet the experts that we have on the line today, let me go ahead and first introduce myself. My name's Jen Goldsack. I'm the CEO here at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. And then let me orient you to the conversation. Our journal clubs are certainly my favorite event on the DIME events calendar. They are a real opportunity to sort of collaborate with and learn from the authors of manuscripts we choose to review together, and perhaps more importantly, the sort of leading scientists and thinkers in our field. So welcome, everyone. Quick note for all of you, today's session is being recorded, which means that after you get done with today, if you have colleagues who would benefit from listening to the conversation, that will be available. It will be on the DIME website within about 24 hours. We do also encourage a sort of discussion-based approach to our journal clubs. So our authors are going to give us a look behind the scenes at some of the work they did to get to the manuscript that you've had the chance to review, as well as talk about the implications of their findings. We then have the opportunity to discuss that with them. So you can participate in a number of different ways. You can either raise your hand, not like this, but using the raise hand function in the chat. We'll go ahead and call on you in order to pose your questions live to our experts. Or you can type your questions into the chat function and we will go ahead and call on you to unmute yourself. Or if you're not somewhere where you can chat, we can certainly answer your question directly from the chat. So with no further ado, I want to go ahead and dive into our session today. I am very excited that we are going to be talking about sort of using digital tools when designing patient-centric clinical trials, thinking specifically about Parkinson's with our partners at CPP. I'm delighted to welcome Cindy, Martin, Mark, and Johan to the conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and ask each of them to introduce themselves. And Johan, maybe we can start with you.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Johan Hellsten. I am a biologist by training. I've been working for Lundbeck now for soon 13 years. For the last 2 years or so in the patient insights team, where I'm a senior specialist. I am also a person living with Parkinson's disease since almost 6 years now. So one foot in the patient arena, so to speak, and one in the treatment and the industry. I'm really looking forward to this discussion and presentation today.
Fantastic. Johan, I think you bring such unique insights and expertise to this conversation. I'm really excited to learn from you today. Welcome.
Thanks.
Mark, would you like to go ahead and go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks so much for having us present today. My name is Mark Frazier. I'm Co-Chief Scientific Officer at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. My background is in neuroscience and pharmacology and have been with the foundation for about 15 years. And we are one of the original members of CPP, and really excited to partner with the group on regulatory issues in Parkinson's disease. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic, Mark. We're thrilled you're here, and we do enjoy our work with Michael J. Fox Foundation. We have Sahini on our scientific leadership board and do value that greatly. I think we have Cindy on the line. Cindy, your video is not on, but do you want to unmute and say hello to everyone?
Yeah, apologies. Of course, last minute this morning, my Zoom is choosing not to open on my computer. So that's why I'm on my phone and it's not letting my video on. So apologies for that. I'll keep working on it. But in the meantime, yes, I'm Cindy Zadikoff. I am a medical director at AbbVie. I am the CPP industry co-director for CPP, which is what brings me to the group today. And I'm also a physician specializing in movement disorders at Northwestern University, and excited to share what we've done with everybody and have a conversation this morning and afternoon.
Fantastic, Cindy, delighted you're here. And as we all know on the line, no medtech presentation or conversation is complete without some technical gymnastics. So thank you for taking that one for the team today, Cindy. Martin, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, ask you to introduce yourself to everyone, give us some backstory on CPP, and then you can go ahead and start sort of sharing the slides as you and your co-authors take us through this fantastic body of work.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Let's make sure that I'm not muted. So just to add to the technical issues. So thank you, Jen, for the introduction. And thank you for the great invitation to present our work with the DIME Society. This is a great opportunity for all of us. And as you mentioned, I would like to give a very brief introduction to the Critical Path for Parkinson's Consortium, which in shorthand we call CPP, and the 3D team, as some of you may not be quite familiar with that. Oh, and just to give a little bit of background, I am the Senior Scientific Director for CPP, and I joined CPP exactly a year ago. So, and it has been quite a year. So CPP, and we can go to the next slide, please. So CPP is a nonprofit global consortium focused on facilitating the regulatory path to new treatments for Parkinson's disease. And we do that through the creation of so-called drug development tools. These tools are developed in a very collaborative effort among scientists from the pharmaceutical industry. We work with academic institutions and patient advocacy associations, such as the Michael J. Fox Foundation, for example. We do that in a pre-competitive space and definitely under the advisement of the regulatory health authorities, such as the FDA in the United States and the EMA in Europe. The creation of these drug development tools really requires consensus and data-driven research. And through that, we really can increase efficiency, safety, and speed in developing new therapies. So 3DT, which actually stands for Digital Drug Development Tools, is an initiative that we launched in 2018 and to really leverage our unique role as a neutral convener. And the main focus of 3DT is to bring all relevant stakeholders together in a pre-competitive space again, to collectively engage with regulatory agencies to optimize the use, the effective use of digital health technology in Parkinson's disease clinical trials. So under the advisement of the regulatory health agencies, we have been addressing several issues. And one of these issues relates to the willingness and ability of people with Parkinson's to engage in clinical trials that use digital health technologies and remote monitoring. So this issue was addressed in a work group consisting of experts from all 3DT stakeholders. And we created a slide deck with recommendations. So I'm very happy to introduce Mark, Johan, and Cindy, who were part of the work group and who actually will provide more background information on the slide deck. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion afterward. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mark.
Great. Thanks, Martin. I first wanted to just acknowledge some of the key takeaways of this deck. And we intentionally chose to make it a deck rather than a peer-reviewed manuscript, knowing that this is a dynamic and fluid situation, and we wanted the ability to quickly update these takeaways and recommendations as we have new lessons learned. And I don't think I need to tell this audience that the landscape is changing rapidly in this field. And so we felt like it was important to really update this in real time. But clearly there is increasing interest in using digital health technologies, not just in Parkinson's, but in medical research more broadly. And that introduces some complexities in clinical trial design, recruitment, and retention. And it was really important to have engagement strategies for Parkinson's disease that really enabled engagement throughout the entire process. And I think that is one of the themes that you'll hear about this presentation is really involving people living with Parkinson's disease from the conception of the study all the way through running the study and getting input after the study is complete. And as I mentioned, I think many of these recommendations will go beyond Parkinson's disease. Many of them might seem evident, but through this work that the foundation and other CPP for-profit members have done in running clinical trials, there have been collective lessons learned that we're excited to share and present cohesively in sort of a draft guideline and recommendations. So the next slide, I think, just lists all of the individuals that contributed. I must say that this was a really easy group to co-chair. I want to recognize Marianne Minders from Radboud, who is my fellow co-chair. What's exciting about this group is that it represents individuals in nonprofit groups, for-profit groups, and people living with Parkinson's disease. And it really, truly was an honor and joy to work with this group. They all contributed, were all very active. And as I said, it was very easy to come up and collaborate with to come up with these recommendations. Next slide. So I will say the slide deck can be wordy at times. We, as I mentioned, we chose not to develop a manuscript, but actually have a standalone slide deck. And this was meant to be read by the audience and understood by the audience without assistance in presentation. So you may see a lot of words, but hopefully you'll find this useful. And the real background on this is that, as I mentioned, many clinical trials were increasingly integrating digital health technologies in Parkinson's research. And there were a number of different learnings along the way. And one of them, the key being really engagement and talking to people with Parkinson's disease is really important. And so the group embarked on this effort to do a literature review, share our experiences in our own unique clinical trials that each group had run, and come up with the recommendations that could be shared within CPP and more broadly as we're doing today. Next slide. I think what's exciting about Parkinson's disease is that there are an increasing number of clinical trials, particularly clinical trials that are addressing what we think is the underlying pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease. And since it's a movement disorder, it's natural to think that digital health technologies can really play a role in measuring change in Parkinson's disease, measuring change in symptoms. And it's attractive, obviously, because potential smartphone or smartwatch technologies or other digital health technologies can add the advantage of continuous monitoring beyond somewhat less frequent in-clinic visits. But what we observed in the field, which is really using digital health technologies for a number of years, is that there was variability in engagement of individuals and variability in retention of subjects in these clinical trials and clinical studies. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of recommendations for how to increase engagement and increase retention. And what you'll hear in the subsequent slides are recommendations that this group came up with. So I think we'd like to start, as we'd like to start all things focused on the person living with Parkinson's disease. And Johan is going to take us through the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. This is a figure from a fairly recent article by Swedish patient advocate Sara Riggare and colleagues. And the authors emphasize that in the past, PWP, person or people with Parkinson, involvement in digital health development has been small. And that has resulted in many quote-unquote solutions looking for a problem rather than developing solutions based on actual needs of people living with Parkinson's. And in the future, it is hoped that patient involvement will increase substantially and be in equal partnership with researchers and clinicians. And the authors also highlight the right of people with Parkinson's to access their own data, and that they should routinely receive personalized feedback based on the data, and that active involvement of people with Parkinson's as equal partner in this digital health development, that needs to be the norm, and if necessary, mandated and or incentivized. That's the viewpoints from a number of patients written this publication here. Next slide, please. And here we have the following text. There is a quote from a man who at the time was 88 years old, having been diagnosed with Parkinson's 15 years earlier, who participated in the Sense Park trial or project, European, I think we're in European, the framework from the EU, investigating the ability to sort of monitor at home, if I remember correctly. And he, this is not mentioned here, but he mentioned that part of his health-related quality of life was being in control, that gave him self-esteem and confidence, important elements of well-being. But this was all compromised by his disease, and as he put it, my earlier holistic well-being enshrouded view was frequently interrupted by unpredictable off-period, which can be painful and depressive. And he also says that he doesn't want to become the PD to take over or become a preoccupation, but he needs to regain control. And by having this system being able to measure critical symptomatic and autonomic elements of this condition, that will provide him with reliable data and his clinician with reliable data. And this will all be in this sort of spirit of shared decision making that can plan appropriate treatments that he will respond to and that will benefit him. Next slide, please. So, success of digital health technologies in clinical trials or in clinical development in general, that is indeed a multi-stakeholder situation. And the role of patients there, I believe, should very much be emphasized. And in addition to all other aspects mentioned here, such as, I mean, almost like a sort of good research practice, like data sharing, having data standards and collaboration, which are keys to success, we can only achieve success in terms of improving the lives of people with Parkinson if addressing meaningful aspects of health via patient-centric digital biomarkers. Next slide, please. And again, the successful use and the practical implementation of digital health technologies in clinical studies that requires really the involvement also of multiple stakeholders. At the center here, we have the person with Parkinson's disease, but family and carer and friends and partners. And we might have heard it already, but I'm sure you will hear the words early and frequent or frequently in the next slides here in this presentation. Yeah, I think I can hand over to Cindy now, who will take this through the remaining part of this presentation.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Johan. So I seem to have been able to beat my technical problems. So I am here in full screen. So again, as you've heard from Mark, why did we do this? Using digital health technology has unique opportunities, but with that comes unique complexities. And so our goal here was to produce something that was a living document that could react to the changing landscape, but that would provide some guidelines, some recommendations, and even just some things to consider as people are considering the use of DHT, regardless of the type of that device. And again, it's meant for anybody who's engaging in clinical studies. So next slide, please. So what was in and out of scope here? We really wanted to think about this from a start to finish process. So it's about not only designing the trial, but it's also about how do we, efficiently enroll in a study? And once we enroll in the study, how do we keep people into the study? How do we maximize adherence and retention and engagement? And so you'll see these recommendations and considerations and some examples that hopefully outline all of that. What we did not intend to do was provide any device-specific recommendations, nor did we make recommendations about very specific populations or considerations. So for one example, right, is studies might need to use or want to use digital health tools with cognitive impairments. There's a couple of pointers to consider, but really digging into that was out of scope for what we were trying to do here. Next slide, please. So again, I think we've said all of this already, but integrating these technologies is becoming commonplace. If we can reduce our dropout rates, it will help the sample sizes that are needed, minimize costly delays. And so there's an opportunity to optimize these studies, and understanding the challenges that are posed, even if there are opportunities, is really important so we can optimize these studies. And as Johan alluded to, we really embrace the notion of early and frequent engagement of the patient, of the person living with whatever disease. And again, I think one of the things that you'll see is, while this focused specifically on Parkinson's disease, and there may be some recommendations specifically to Parkinson's disease, really many of the things that are here are, I would hope, would resonate regardless of the patient population in which one is considering engaging with these digital health technologies. Next slide, please. So how did we go about doing this? So as you heard, we had a very engaged working group from a large variety of backgrounds. And so, many of the recommendations come from those individual experiences and best practices, but we wanted to ground it in the literature. And so that's where we started. We started with a pragmatic exploration of the literature to what is out there about the barriers and the facilitators for use of digital health technology in clinical trials. And we bucketed into three different things. So it was bucketed into digital health technology itself, the participants, and the study design. And so you'll see that on these next few slides. So here you'll see some of the things that came up in the literature regarding barriers and facilitators for the technology itself. So for example, so this is the ones related to the study design. So again, thinking about how often are you capturing data, trying to do things that are meaningful to the participant, making sure that you've given them proper instructions. So we took all of these and incorporated much of this into our recommendations. Next slide, please. So what are those recommendations? And again, we've framed some of these as things to consider, which is why you'll see question marks. And then we framed some of these as these are things you should really think about doing. Here are recommendations. And a lot of this is overlapping, right? They are not mutually exclusive, fitting into one bucket. So you will see some general themes across the spectrum, from design to enrollment to retention and adherence. So again, some things, one of these things that are specific to Parkinson's disease, for example, may be that patients experience motor fluctuations. And so you have to think about, if you are asking somebody to use a digital health technology during that period, is it possible? What kind of a burden is placed on them? other things that are not necessarily specific to Parkinson's disease, but when you're designing it, what impact is this device actually going to have on the person's day-to-day life? How often do they need to charge it? How easy it is to use it? Are there other factors that you need to think about when integrating this into your protocol design? Next slide, please. When it comes to enrollment, one of the most important things is really to give the participant the why. Help them understand why they're being asked to do what they're being asked to do. When they're vested in the study, they're much more likely to enroll in the study and more likely to adhere and remain engaged in the study. So providing them those informational materials that are easy for them to understand, which explain the use, is really important. Beyond understanding why they're doing it, they really need to understand what they're getting involved in, right? How much personal data is going to be relayed? How often are they going to need to do those assessments? What Wi-Fi accessibility do they need? And what resources are going to be available to them if they need help, right? That technical support, that help desk is so exceedingly important to make sure that nobody's sitting around floundering, feeling frustrated, which will lead to them, even if they've enrolled, not wanting to engage. So this sort of help is exceedingly important in a successful trial. Next slide, please. So again, once you've gotten them to enroll in this study, compliance and retention is probably an even bigger challenge. And some of that challenge depends again on what you're asking them to do, for how long you're asking them to do it, how it's going to impact their day-to-day activities. Do they have to delay certain things because of how they need or when they need to complete assessments? Is it going to interfere with whatever tool they're using with doing any sorts of exercise? How user-friendly is that interface? So again, designing the tool, designing that study with the input from that person, in this case, living with Parkinson's disease participant, is really important. So it is user-friendly and very easy to use. One suggestion was considering some sort of gaming activity, which might help, again, engage the participant. There are some ethical considerations that need to be, considered when making those decisions. And again, this is a very fast changing landscape, but just certain things to think about, which may improve retention and compliance. The other thing that came across as being very important is being really proactive with lessons learned, right? As you're doing that study, you are learning things all the time from different sites. And so making sure to be proactive about sharing those lessons learned with other sites to optimize the participant experience across the board is important. Next slide, please. Engaging those people, those participants early and frequently, as you heard, maybe holding some retention events to get the community of participants engaged, giving them some messaging about, the DHT use specifically may also help with that. Although there are some concerns about how much information one can provide, which I'll allude to on the next slide, which we can go to. So as I said, having some dedicated points of contact, sending reminders, those sorts of things to really help the participant is key. As I said, sometimes sharing information, a participant engages in a study, they enroll in a study, it's going on for a really long time, they get no messaging, no feedback, anything, and it's hard to keep them engaged. So, we've talked about these points of contact, monthly newsletters, things like that. Sharing their own information may be a way to engage them, may provide an additional incentive for participation. And certainly we believe that participants are entitled to their own information. However, we also recognize that there is concern with this approach too, right? Are you doing some unintentional blinding? Are you doing something to the data by sharing some of this information? And so while we don't have a final, recommendation of what needs to be done here, because the answer isn't quite clear, these are just things that I think we all need to continue to grapple with, and the approach may change as this field matures as well, but certainly something that needs to be considered. Next slide, please. And so while we also think that tools are really, really important, these digital health technologies offer us some unique opportunities. They may not be the answer each and every time. And so we shouldn't take, throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. And there may be times where collecting information in a different or complementary way is just as important. And we shouldn't just disregard that simply because we have digital tools available to us. And when we do think about digital tools, certainly there's an emphasis from the regulators about making these meaningful as well, right? Just because we can measure, what does it mean? Why does it mean? Why is it important? And so making sure to capture that the patient's perspective of how these tools are measuring, how they are functioning and how they are feeling is really important as well, and not to be forgotten when designing this study. Next slide, please. And so with that, we're almost ready to conclude and open it up to everybody. Again, we would say that to ensure the successful engagement of participants in these studies utilizing these tools, really early and frequent involvement is really important. As Mark said from the beginning, while there's been a proliferation of trials using DHT, this is still really in its infancy compared to many other things that we've been doing. And so there's lessons we've learned already, and these guidelines are based on that, but we are sure there are many lessons that will need to be learned and that we will learn along the way. And so, it would be naive to think that these recommendations will stand in perpetuity without needing some updating as well, which is again why we went for this format as well. Lastly, what we wanted to do was provide some resources to people thinking about this. We provided recommendations, but we wanted to provide some resources as well. And I'll let Mark talk for a moment about those. And I think with that, after that, we'll turn it over and open it up to a discussion, and interested to hear the thoughts of many of you who are engaging in this as well.
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, a lot of these resources are really just practical examples of what study sponsors could use. And you'll see the Dime Society website there as well. The foundation is sponsoring a study called PPMI that is an observational study and includes digital health technologies. And we have a number of different resources that we provide to individual participants that explain context, the why, how to engage with DHTs, and some resources available to them. And then there's been a number of other studies that have generated these practical resources, and they're listed here. And this is an evergreen document. So if there are other resources you're aware of, please let us know. We'd love to add them. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and we can open it up for discussion.
Colleagues, this was absolutely fantastic. I was taking notes furiously as we were going through. I think we can stop the screen share, and I'll invite all of our colleagues on the line who are somewhere where they're able to go ahead and turn on their video and really engage in the discussion. I will keep an eye on the chat to see if I see any questions coming in or raised hands, and we'll get into the conversation. So a couple of things from my side. I'll take sort of moderators liberties here. First thing, as you know, one of our flagship initiatives, the playbook, is 300 Google slides. So we absolutely sort of recognize the value in sort of taking the approach that you did with this work. And frankly, I applaud it, so that you can keep it up to date, so you can keep that resource live with the best scholarship on engaging patients in the process. So wanted to recognize that. I have a question for you. One of the comments that you made a couple of times throughout the presentation was around the sort of it's not enough to do a single sort of snapshot of engagement. We need to think about engaging people with Parkinson's throughout the sort of tool development, tool selection, protocol sort of development, and then the deployment sort of part of this. You mentioned some lovely strategies, newsletters and this kind of thing for really building a community that you can use as your thought partners, moving towards that sort of really integrated Venn diagram. I wondered if you had used the digital tools themselves at all as opportunities for sort of engagement and feedback. Are you getting any sort of data from the tools? Are you using the tools themselves, sort of surveys, things like that? Could there be part of the solution in the solution?
So, I mean, I can start. I don't know that I personally have data on how different studies have done that, but I think the short answer is yes, right? And however we decide to interrogate the tools in which way, 100%, I think that is an opportunity to interrogate that solution as well, and make it part of, make it not only the tool that they use to provide us information that we're looking for from an endpoint, but also about ease of use and how it's working and everything else. So without a doubt.
I would just add, it's not necessarily a DHT in, I think, how we think about it, but the foundation is sponsoring a study called Fox Insight, which is an online study where individuals, participants with Parkinson's and without, enter information through online surveys. And we have found very effective strategies doing just one-time surveys or questions, for example, about COVID and their experience with COVID, or environmental exposures that don't necessarily require longitudinal acquisition of data. Just hitting them with sort of quick questions, I think, increases the level of engagement. So you can imagine similar types of strategies with actual devices, either smartphones or smart watches, where you're probing with information that may be of interest to the participant and the study investigators.
Yeah, just to add one point to it. So I think this is indeed a very good approach, and one that I could endorse for using. But just to play the devil's advocate, right? When does it become too much, right? when do you ask too many quick surveys or quick updates, or that to an extent where people get annoyed by it? And I think that, in the whole patient engagement discussion, right? I mean, it's a very fine balance all the time as to, engaging people in the use of technologies, but, don't go to a level where, every day they need to fill out 10 surveys and things like that, right? And I think that's one of the recommendations as well, right? So yes, you could leverage the tools, but just to play the devil's advocate there, you also want to make very sure you're not overdoing it.
You can almost envisage a sort of bell-shaped curve here, can't you? Where there's the meaningful engagement, thoughtful engagement, where sort of the patients see high value in that interaction and that feedback loop, and there's this there's this peak in the middle, and then quite quickly it drops off again. If we're pushing too hard, if we're doing so much, if it becomes burden rather than benefit. I think that's, that was something that really sort of stood out in your thoughtful recommendations. Here at DIME, we're considering doing some work. There's been a lot of appetite from our community in the sort of Alzheimer's and related dementia space. Obviously, cognitive impairment sort of extends into the Parkinson's community. How do you grapple with sort of patient engagement when participants may have sort of a variety of different forms of sort of cognitive impairment, and that sadly, with the natural history of the disease, does increase over time?
I think that care partner or peer partner, if you will, involvement is key here, and that is not only relating to a person who has cognitive impairment due to progressed PD, because a simple thing like there's been quite a few qualitative studies quite recently published emphasizing the need for care partner reporting, for example, regarding off-period symptoms, and also impulse control disorder related symptoms, which you might not be aware of or even hiding as a patient, but your spouse, for example, are clearly catching. So, I mean, to me, that seems like an obvious sort of avenue of making sure that this will work also in that population.
Yeah, and I think you really have to consider a lot of, again, similar to anything else, but what are you asking the participant to do? What do they have to wear? Who's answering the question, right? Is it depending on how advanced their dementia is? Are they going to remember to put that phone in their pocket? Are they going to drop it? Is the watch, are they just going to try to pull it off? Or is it comfortable for them to wear that they forget about it? If you're asking them to answer certain questions, you know, it's probably going to be the care partner who reminds them of doing that and may have to answer some of those things. And is it okay? Can they mimic if you want them to do a certain movement? Can they show them what that is? And or will that impact the results of it? So I think it certainly doesn't mean that it's not possible, but there's no doubt it adds in another layer of complexity. And that's where I also think really engaging particularly with the care partner in that protocol design, ease of use, things like that, having people be able to say, yeah, there's no way I'm going to be able to get them to do that, or this is reasonable, will, I think, really, you know, set a study up for success from the beginning, rather than finding out halfway through, nobody can do what you thought they could do.
Cindy, I read an article this morning. It was, they covered it in stats. So I found it through the news and then went and read the peer review, but it was about, they did some benchmarking of the last 2 years of studies and investigational sort of research studies. The number of protocol amendments in the last 2 years has sort of gone up an order of magnitude. We knew it was a pain point before. Obviously, you know, we should expect lots of sort of amendments right now as folks have tried to sort of course correct and be more agile and bring them to patients, avoid the site. But I also think it speaks to this idea of, you know, if we get it right first, there's enormous downstream benefits to doing it. And bringing together some of the recommendations that you've sort of highlighted today, there's a few things here, right? Which is, you know, we don't want to go over the top of that bell-shaped curve, right? We don't want to be collecting too much. I always think, gosh, a long time ago now, I heard Rob Califf say that sometimes protocol design is like decorating a Christmas tree, right? Everyone has their special ornament and you just sort of, everyone wants to hang their special ornament, whether or not you need that data point. And I think now with this proliferation of sensors and, you know, well, surely we can do this ecological momentary assessment using the watch. Surely we can do these questions through the app. Surely we can just add another stream. Like the temptation there is sort of so high. I actually think this is really important to think not just about the tool and the measure, but the practical implications during the protocol design, which you guys highlight really nicely. As you know, I put it in the chat, I said to you guys before we got started, the favorite piece I have in the deck is the sort of the Venn diagram. And, you know, you guys described beautifully there what we're driving towards and what we hope to see here at Dime, right? Which is that the use of these digital tools and these data streams really start to collapse those silos between research and care, and they much more meaningfully engage the sort of patient and participant in every aspect of sort of care and research related to them. I wonder if, as you guys are sort of driving and advocating for that journey, how have you observed and partnered with sort of clinical experts, whether on the care side or the research side, and really embracing this sort of high touch patient engagement? What's been sort of unexpected in that journey?
I mean, I can just give an example just from my own personal. I don't know whether what's unexpected or not, but I'll say again, I come from multiple backgrounds, right? Just in that I'm a physician, I was on the investigator side, and now I am in industry. And so one of the things I'd always advocated for was more, participant involvement in our protocol designs early on. And certainly this project was actually very timely for me as we were working on something. Every company has their SOPs and things that you have to do. And when you're doing your protocol reviews, it was always insisted upon that you get like a content expert, you get, the investigator to come in and review it. And I pushed back very heavily and said, that's great. But I actually think not only do we need them, but you have to have your coordinator review it, because the truth is the coordinator is the one who's actually running the study, and they know a heck of a lot better what's feasible or not. And not only that, a patient. And so we actually were able to create at V, we created the first, basically a pool of patients and their caregivers with Parkinson's disease, who we then did pull in to actually review the protocol before we got going, and provided some useful information, right? It's important, I think, that we are upfront and honest. Not every recommendation that they give us are we actually going to be able to implement, but I think so. I think having an honest and upfront conversation about what you're hoping to achieve from them and all of that can be very useful. But I think that there's always, especially in industry, I think that there's a lot of barriers put up between actually engaging directly with patients, for good reason as well. But I think that there are ways to break those down if you get creative. And I think it behooves us all to do that. And I think this exercise showed us that we could, right? It took a long time, but we got there. And so hopefully, I think we will be seeing that become part of what we all do, not only at AbbVie, but at other places as well. Whether you're designing a study for industry or in academics, doesn't really matter.
I was just going to add, one of the surprises I've had, at least personally, was that there have been devices that have been FDA cleared for a number of years for managing Parkinson's disease. And I was surprised at the low adoption, as far as I could tell, from neurologists in using some of these tools. And, I think one of the reasons, there are probably many, but one of the reasons was there wasn't a whole lot of data that justified and showed the value proposition of using some of these tools in care and even in research, for that matter. And so we have supported some studies to try to really generate the data, good or bad, to understand how these tools can be used in a more rigorous research study, controlled research study. So I think that's one thing that the foundation has done, is really just to try to demonstrate whether there is value to someone caring for someone with Parkinson's disease, what the utility could be.
So a couple of things there, Mark. I really like the idea that, and especially within the DIME community, where we have a lot of sort of digital innovators, the idea that, validity may not be enough, right? That clinical utility, especially when we think about putting it into care, that we can really actually see return in practice. If we're asking you to modify your workflow, if we're asking you to look at an additional data stream, if we're asking you to take the time and sort of resources from your clinic to work with a patient and their sort of care partner on deploying this tool, then having a sort of deep understanding of the value it brings back to you and how you're going to achieve that is really important. And Cindy, I love the, sometimes it's not going to work reminder, right? The whole point of this engagement is not performative and to get everything rubber stamped, right? Sometimes we're going to think we have a great idea. Boy, have we seen it in some of the work that we've done, and it's absolutely not. In practice, it doesn't work. When you think about the lives and the preferences of the sort of the patients we're all here to serve, it's just, it's a good idea on paper, and it's completely sort of incongruent with the reality of sort of putting it into practice. So I like the reminder that this is not just greasing the skids to an easy yes. And sometimes these are hard conversations. Sometimes you have to bring that information back and do a pretty aggressive sort of course correct in order to make this work in practice. Just, I'm going to call on you because you're a brave arrow and you put your you put your screen on here. You do an awful lot of this kind of development, and you think about sort of public health level and sort of population level deployment of these tools. You know, when you think about some of the recommendations we've been learning around the sort of participant patient engagement, how does this jive with what you've had success with in practice at Active Insights?
Thank you. I'm not brave, I just do what I'm told, I think.
I knew I liked you.
Thank you very much for the. I apologise. I arrived a little late to the call, but the second half that I managed to pick up was great, and I look forward to being able to see the slides at the beginning. One of the comments that I think Cindy was making that particularly struck a note with some of the work that we're doing, actually more in the cardiac space at the moment, where we actually have the opportunity to be a principal investigator on a study which is deploying wearables over an entire year. Is that this I think it's actually a need to be able to work both with the digital and the analog, and you know, we see our participants, they you know, we all live our lives in a mixture between the two. You know, we use post-it notes, we're used to using paper, gives an affordance to us as general users, as people, that electronic devices still struggle to do. And for example, this is more anecdotal, and we will look to be able to create some publications on this, but at the moment we see much better adherence to paper-based sleep diaries than we do to electronic ones, because an electronic, it's a piece of paper, and the participant knows that she keeps it by her bed with a pencil, and she just writes the time down when she goes to bed, and she might forget when she wakes up in the morning, but after the shower she'll write it down. On a device, that's very difficult to have something which has that same level of proximity without being intrusive. And I think that, you know, Jen, you described that the sort of the bell-shaped curve there, and I think the challenge is that if we do too much, it's not just fatigue and burden. Actually, we start to compromise privacy, because we start intruding on people's lives in a way that they don't necessarily react very positively to. So for me, out of the comments that I've heard, that's one that really strikes a note. I don't know if anyone else has got shared experience like that.
Just, I like that, and I'm curious to hear from our colleagues on the line, but I like that a lot. The story you tell about the sleep diary and our experience with that. I have plenty of stuff on my bedside table that's exactly like that, you know, and it's not my phone and I didn't charge it, and God, can it be quiet? I just need that alarm needs to stop, all of this kind of thing. And I like the language that you use around sort of being intrusive. I think it's probably the second piece to Cindy's comment around we have to be prepared for hard feedback. And I think we also have to be prepared that, you know, digital isn't a silver bullet, right? There are going to be plenty of challenges that we have. There's going to be plenty of engagement needs we have. There's going to be plenty of data needs that we have where a widget is not the correct solution. You know, digital is wonderful for friction-free, right? Which means it has to be done right, and passive sort of data streams that give us a huge amount of insight into folks' everyday lives. But if it's, you know, we can't be that hammer in search of a nail. I really like that. I wonder if others on the panel have sort of thoughts or reactions to sort of Joss's anecdote, and I think really important comments around hitting the sweet spot as we think about digital tools and digital solutions.
Yeah, I think one comment I want to make, so as a former academic and designing studies, I'm always worried about, you know, recruitment bias, right? Are you, you know, biasing your recruitment? Are you sort of going in a direction where you sort of, you know, are recruiting the people for the study that you want to see in your study, right? And don't have a sort of broad approach, right? And I think that might apply here as well, right? And that sort of maybe applies to the point of, you know, using analog measures as well. You have to be careful that if you go in all digital in a clinical trial, that maybe you only get the people that are digital literate, right? That are digital savvy, right? In using technologies, right? And that you have people that actually like using digital technologies, or that you know, if you have to upload data, you know, not everybody has high-speed Wi-Fi available. Not everybody knows how to do it. So I think these are all things you need to take into consideration as well, right? And I think that's one of our recommendations as well. Don't forget analog, right? And that's what Josh said as well, right? Analog measures still work pretty well as well, and actually might be preferred by some people. So so it's this good combination, I think, of doing both analog, making sure that you get people in your trial that also represent people that are not only digital literate, right? I mean that you have an equitable distribution. I think that's all considerations you need to those are all points you need to take into consideration when you design your trial. So recruitment bias is, I think the risk for recruitment bias is large if you just go all digital in your clinical trial.
I think that's so important. Colleagues, I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we wrap up this fantastic conversation with a strong call to action. I'm going to go a bit of a round robin if I can. Phenomenal recommendations. Thank you for coming and sharing them with our community. I look forward to sort of learning how we see this sort of influencing practice. Mark, going back to your example of that sort of low adoption, hopefully we can move the needle on all of that. I wonder if we can go around and have you each sort of give a quick sort of statement on the one sort of recommendation or the one thing that you really hope that everyone sort of takes here and starts implementing immediately as they think about designing both products and sort of protocols that use these digital tools. And Mark, you're at the top of my screen, so I'm going to start with you if I can.
Well, I've already said this, but I think inviting individuals living with the disorder that is being studied, not just at one time, but throughout the process, I think is really important. So I'll stick with that.
I love it. Underscore. Great point, Mark. Thank you. Cindy, do you want to go next?
Well, I feel like I had to go first, or maybe it would be okay if we all said the same thing, because that would have been my message too, right? I think for all the reasons we've kind of talked about through the course of the discussion, to get it right the first time, or to get it closer to right, and we need to do this. None of our studies, nothing happens without the people doing it. So we need to know that it works for them.
Fantastic. Martin, do you want to pile on here?
Yeah, I will pile on. Because this was really the recurrent theme, throughout all our discussions, right? Each time it was a consideration, we need, at whatever point of the discussion, whatever recommendation we came up with, we need to have the patient involved with these recommendations. So yeah, I'll be boring, but that is the most the most important conclusion of this slide deck, and that was my eye-opening point. So yeah.
Fantastic. Johan, round us out here.
I will echo, and I will what the others have said, but I will probably also provide some personal experience here. I think this notion of measuring meaningful aspect of health, really, say that I want to be able to continue playing the guitar. That's really important for me. And if I would for some reason be equipped with a device measuring tremor, that would not be at all relevant, because I don't have tremor, but I have bradykinesia, with slowness of movement when I'm in an off state, and that makes it impossible to play the guitar. But the tremor is never there. So I mean, it's really trying to figure out that's my situation. It's something else for another person with this condition. But listening to patients and taking all these aspects into consideration when designing the trial, and engaging frequent and early.
Johan, that's such a tremendous example, and I think to bring it together, good isn't using widgets. Good is really thinking about a new set of tools in the toolbox to better serve the patients that we're all here to support as part of our work. So this was absolutely fantastic. Congratulations on a phenomenal set of recommendations that will help us all put that into practice. Thank you for coming and sharing your insights with us today. And I know on behalf of a really tremendous team, you guys are the leaders and you had great colleagues on this work too. So Mark, Cindy, Johan, Martin, thank you so much for your hard work, and thank you for sharing that with us today. I want to make sure we break on time, folks. We have a webinar next week. Claire and I are going to be talking a little bit about our plans here at DIME for the upcoming year, as a bit of a state of the nation, if you'd care to join us. That's next week. And then our next journal club is based on our sensor data integrations project and our first manuscript to have come out of that. So once you've done your good patient engagements, once you've deployed these tools, how on earth do you get the data in a way that it's safe, relevant, and trustworthy? That's the next step, and we'll be talking about that on the next session. Colleagues, thank you so much for being here. This was fantastic. Enjoyed learning from you and look forward to sort of championing those resources. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.